if you would like a copy of it, Elizabeth will be sending out copies, and we will be posting it as well. Just a brief introduction to us, the Fine Art Group. The Fine Art Group is an independent firm. We have five core services. We are completely vertically integrated. So what that means is that all of our services are in-house. We have over 52 full-time staff globally. And then in addition, we bring in the best of class in other areas of assets and knowledge and expertise, an additional 50 or so. So that brings us to about 110 brains that are part of our 5 core services. We have an appraisal division, so we assist clients with very complicated appraisals and very simple ones as well. Everything from fractional interest and rental leaseback to insurance. We have a full advisory team that help our clients serve, really buy art, but with due diligence as kind of the primary focus of our gaze. And again, we're independent and we're there to provide information to our clients. We have an art agency or sales division, and this division helps our clients de-access major collections. We anticipate this year to be somewhere in the realm of $300 million in sales. In addition, we have a full lending business that's a non-recourse or asset-only lending business with about $800 million in deployable capital. And last but not least, the father of our company, which is Art Investment. This is how we were established over 20 years ago. We have had over 8 funds, and we are constantly kind of updating and creating new structures that we think will best benefit our clients when they're looking to use their art as part of their financial portfolio. So let me talk a little bit about today's speakers. I'm going to introduce you to each of the speakers, and then what I would like is for them to give a brief, very brief biography and their specialization. So again, myself, Anita Harriet, president of the Fine Art Group, and I'd like to introduce Henry Little. Henry Little is one of our directors. He's calling us today from London. Henry, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Anita. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. So I come from a gallery background. I ran my own business for 6-7 years. I've been working at the Fine Art Group for nearly 4 years. I built several very large collections of contemporary art with clients. I tend to focus on the primary market, so buying art that is being sold for the first time from galleries directly from the artists. But also I buy across the 20th century. I buy at auction, I sell at auction, so I'm a bit of an all-rounder. I get involved with a lot of other projects that we have, so mainly advisory, but a little bit of agency. And I also do a lot of in-house research and a lot of the publishing and kind of in proprietary analysis that we offer.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. If you ever see one of our market analytics of one of our artists, a lot of the times Henry has written them, is kind of a geek and an academic at heart, no doubt.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Morgan as well. Morgan, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hi, I'm Morgan Schoenhoven. I am actually a recent new member of the Fine Art Group. My background is actually deep auction. I had always been at auction until recently. I was with Christie's for the last 10 years, and before that, Bonhams. And my area of expertise is Impressionist and modern art. I ran the works on paper sale in the Impressionist and modern department for a little while before transferring to Los Angeles, where I sort of became more client management focused and helping clients to buy and sell at auction and sort of navigating the relationships between the coasts. So now that I have joined the Fine Art Group, I'm working in the capacity in their art advisory sector, which feels very natural following the position I most recently had at Christie's, because I do a lot of obviously helping with agency as well, because I'm so well versed in how exactly to get every last little bit for the consignor out of the houses. So that is definitely an area of expertise for me as well, in addition to the art side of things.
Thank you so much, Morgan. And the secret weapon is Morgan is in Los Angeles, so we're so happy to have her there. We have so many clients that really require that kind of expertise. And last but certainly not least, Mouse, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Mouse Snyders. I'm the head of art collections management at AIG. I've been there for a good 8 months now, and prior to that, I was for 20 years at Christie's, and most recently, I was for 2 years at Bonhams. And I'm super excited to be having transitioned into AIG. Previously in my career, I spent a lot of time due diligence prior to purchase. Now I spend an awful lot of time due diligence post-purchase. So that's what I hope to share here today. I've got a wonderful team. We're all coming from the commercial art market, and we've newly expanded as well. So I hope you guys can all get to know us really well. And I'm super excited to be partnering here with Anita and her team with the Fine Art Group.
Thank you so much, Mouse. Okay, a little bit about the Fine Art Group, and I think I've already kind of given you some context, but just to get a good sense of it, we have valued in what, over the last year, about 15.3 billion in assets. We transact throughout our entire kind of career, over 2 billion in transactions. So, we're very, very active in the art marketplace, and we're independent, and that's the most important component that we'd like to share with you. But let's get down to really discussing why we're here. All right, so I'm just going to briefly give you an overview of what we saw in November. I was in New York for November sales, and I know all of us were so excited leading up to November sales. For those clients that we represented, we were holding off to November to sell a lot of our works because, as you know, we've all been dealing with COVID and its impact on the art market, which has actually been quite minimal. But there was a lot of pent-up desire to buy and to sell for November. And we also saw that with the major sales, the Cox and Macklowe Collection, which we will discuss in a moment, again, waited until the beginning for November sales to kind of begin their sales. So what the most important component I would really like to take from these sales is that over $1 billion of art was transacted in just the November sales, which is a monumental number. It's about double what we typically see in November sales, which will just give you a sense of it. And again, much of it had to do with the wave of these two major sales, Macklowe and Cox, which both sold at Christie's and Sotheby's. But that being said, it also gave us a good way to do a deep analysis of what is selling in the market, what kind of prices they're achieving. And these are the analytics that we take to our clients, both from a sale perspective and from a purchase perspective. What I thought was most interesting, if you look at all of the sales, so on the left, you'll see each of the sales with each of the auction houses. So you'll see Christie's 21st Century Evening Sale all the way down to Phillips 20th Century Evening Sale. Now, I have a lot of experts right here who can articulate this, but we typically see in a major sale, 85% is a good sell-through rate. If you look at the right, you will look at the sell-through rate is phenomenal, right? So the majority or half of the sales were at 100% sell-through rate. And again, we'll talk about why that is. There are some specific reasons, which we'll discuss further. But even those that did not have, for instance, a lot of guarantees had very high sell-through rates. And I would give particular attention to Phillips 20th Century Evening Sale that was at 93.5% sell-through rate, in which there was not a lot of guarantees on that sale. So there's active selling, but active buying, and at very, very high prices for some of the artists. Okay, so let's take a quick dive into some of the major sales, surprises that we saw, some context around them. So Morgan, can you kind of give us a brief overview of the Cox collection? Tell me what is the story of this collection, and then also let's then take a deep dive into some of the important lots that sold, and kind of how that's a window into kind of the Impressionist market.
Yeah, so the Cox collection was built over, gosh, I think about at least a little bit over 50 years. So a lot of this work has really been fresh to the market. I mean, some of these works haven't been seen for decades because they were in the Cox family home in Texas. A lot of his collection was actually gifted around to several different museums. So he did hold on to some of the very best while also sharing a lot of what he had acquired over his collecting career. I'd say probably my favorite piece in the sale, and was incredibly highlighted and touted everywhere, was the Kaibot. It's such an important picture. It's funny, we always have a joke at the houses. I don't know if, I'm assuming happens at Sotheby's too, but amongst the specialists, anytime we get really excited about, a historically important work, it usually means it's maybe not that marketable, or it's not that desirable. But in this case, I like to disagree. And it also is just, you can see by the price. I would say that while it did not sell for an huge excess of the estimate that they had put forward, I would point out that this estimate was pretty astronomical. Up until this point, Kaibot's record at auction was $22 million in 2019. So this was a really, really far-reaching estimate to go to. So the fact that it did sell where it did, and had competition, was really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about, in terms of the Cox collection, when we have these big single owner sales coming to collection, and as representatives of clients ourselves, sometimes we really like to have a guarantee on these sales. In terms of the Cox collection, was there a guarantee, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So in order to win the collection, it was obviously very competitive, as all of these, sort of big ticket collections are. There was an entire guarantee on the entire collection through Christie's. We obviously don't know what that number is because it's private. But in order to secure it, they did put forth a very big guarantee. I think in the end, they really made the right decision. With these sort of, when the houses do take on these huge guarantees, what they will do is also to sort of share the risk, essentially, by getting third-party backers. And I don't know if you want me to go into that now.
No, I don't think we need to do that now. Take me through, what was the trickle down effect on Impressionism in general? I know that as advisors, we do have, the majority of our clients now are focused very heavily on post-war and contemporary and ultra contemporary. But in looking at the prices that were achieved, not just for the Cox collection, but Impressionism in general across the sales, to what extent is it a window into, interest in Impressionist works today? Can you give me some thought there?
Yeah, well, I think Christie's did a really good job of kind of taking the lead of the Cox collection, a collection that has been grown over such a long period of time, the best of the best, really, really exceptional quality works. And they kind of really tried to carry that over into not only the multi-owner sales of evening sales, but also into the day sales. So they really, it seems like they really tried hard to get artists that were also represented in the Cox collection, and use that as a selling point for certain collectors who may, say, well, I don't know if Impressionism is really in right now. Should I really be selling this? They were able to really frame it as, this is the best time to sell because you will be alongside, you won't, there sometimes can be the effect of, oh, you'll be overshadowed by a collection like this. I think the exact opposite happened here. It really did create a trickle down effect.
I know we bid on a few pieces where we completely were blown out of the water, and these were not important, quote unquote, important works. Well, let's continue to talk about the trickle down effect and focus a little bit on Loiseau. I know you wanted to give us some sense of kind of what the estimates were and what they sold for and what that tells us about this one artist, but specifically about the Impressionist market in general. So take us through your thoughts around these two examples.
Yeah, so these two works were part of the Cox collection and featured in the evening sale. You may wonder why, given those very, very low estimates. Typically, evening sale lots are at least $1 million and up. So since it was a single owner collection, it made sense to, include these works amongst the rest. I think they were certainly, since it is an estate sale in a certain way, I think these were very attractively priced, and that tactic worked. I mean, these are astronomical prices. These are now the top 2 results for Loiseau at auction. So this has really sort of catapulted his market in a sense. I mean, I think that, and we did see that several Loiseau works that were not in the Cox collection also benefited from this attention. I mean, I think with this artist in particular, and I think it's really apparent in the left-hand painting, the connections to the way more expensive Impressionist Monet. I think it's pretty obvious there. So I think that as these big ticket, big blue chip Monets and such become so unreachable, I mean, this is a lot more reasonable.
Yeah, so 2 important points to bring here. One would be what we call the single owner effect. I mean, we dealt with the Rockefeller sale for years, clients contacting us and saying, oh, I have a pothouse. Is it now worth $1 million? I saw at the Rockefeller sale, it sold for $1 million. So, Mouse, I'm going to actually throw this over to you. When we see results like this, and from an insurance perspective, are you expecting everyone to go out and get updated insurance appraisals, or are you still looking for there to be kind of a balance over time?
Yeah, well, we would always recommend to make sure that you're not underinsured, of course. So on general, an insurance appraisal is kind of valid for about 5 years. But if there's these huge market fluctuations, we definitely recommend to check in with the independent appraiser company that you're working with, such as, for instance, the Fine Art Group, to make sure that the values are current and up to date. And then we can make those adjustments accordingly for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I see you have a few more examples. Are these some of the other Loiseaus that sold for high prices, Morgan?
Yes, these are just sort of, these are the works that sort of rode the wave of Cox, should we say.
Henry's having a bit of a laugh right now because these look like all the ultra contemporary artists that were estimated at, $50,000 to $70,000 and sold for $2 million. So, even the Impressionists can be like the ultra contemporary, Henry. Hold your horses.
Can I just ask Morgan a question? I mean, how good do you think these Loiseaus are in terms of, the general, kind of caliber of his output? I mean, I'm looking at the 2 before, they look pretty decent, but these ones here, I mean, they seem relatively unremarkable, or am I being ungenerous?
No. I mean, I think obviously the left-hand subject matter, of course, is very appealing. I agree. So obviously this left-hand painting is much like the next slide, that left-hand painting. I would say I was very surprised by the far right painting, the one with haystacks. This one does, however, include one of his sort of known styles. This hatching, this hatchwork did sort of go on to become one of his signature stylistic moves. So perhaps that had a factor in it. But I would agree that Cox's were much superior.
I mean, there's no doubt that everyone showed up wanting to buy works at the Cox collection. And when they didn't get them, they had to make a right turn and figure out where they were going to buy them. And as we know, Christie's was before everyone else, right? So everyone who didn't win out at Cox said, okay, time to refocus, right? And they went to Sotheby's or Phillips. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Can I ask a stupid question, which is, Morgan, how much is someone, how much are the auction houses talking to each other about timing? Because I think timing played a huge part here. It was Christie's week and then it was Sotheby's week. Yeah. Who did someone made a move first, or is there some dialogue going on at a very senior level?
Mouse might have some more intel there, but I know there's, from my understanding, there is an independent person at each house that navigates and has conversations, because you can't actually, you actually can't legally have a sale at the same time, because it would, it would make too much of a conflict with the other house. So, but maybe Mouse has some better insights from her time.
Yeah, so each of the houses has an independent kind of ombudsman appointed person that is authorized to talk to the other house, and then they alternate in terms of who goes first, second, and third. And yeah, and it's mainly the two houses that alternate who goes first each season. And then they have to work out how many sales are coming in and how many single owner sales, etc. And that's what we've seen this time, that they actually run into almost, I think, 10 days or 2 weeks. I don't think we've seen such a long period of sales for a long time, maybe with the exception of when the sales were truly separate in separate categories. But since they merged, like that was a departure of where we were before.
I mean, who knew they'd have to rent an apartment for a month just to buy some art? Let's look at Bonnard. I think it's an excellent example because, I mean, going into the sale, we all know Bonnard is considered somewhat unfashionable in some respects. So, it's we've watched prices decrease over time with Bonnard step by step by step. So yet we saw these incredible results. So take us through a little bit of the Bonnard market as well.
Yeah, and I must admit from the outset, I actually am a Bonnard fan, and I have been much remiss that his market has not been doing well as of late. So this was a wonderful surprise to me, and obviously numerous other people. But I do think that, we saw a return to figuration. We saw a return to beautiful objects, and I think Bonnard perfectly captures sort of a beautiful, just a beautiful setting. I will say the Phillips one, bonkers. I think we all were completely surprised by that result, and the depth in bidding too within each of these. I mean, I had recorded, there were at least, I think, 5 people on the centerpiece, the ranunculus, and we know that the bowl of fruit, the basket of fruit, I mean, in the end, had 2 people going for what felt like 5 minutes.
How important was provenance in that final sale, you think, of the Bonnard, or the perceived provenance?
Yeah, and that's actually kudos to Phillips. They did a lot of extra research on this piece and found that Bonnard and Matisse had actually exchanged paintings at one point in time, and this resided in Matisse's studio for a set amount of time, where he really sort of, admired it, even there's documentation of a letter where Matisse describes how wonderful it is, and how much he's enjoying it. And I do think that, I mean, I'd like to hope that kind of, because I do love that research that goes into these Impressionist works, really does help tell the story. It tells a wider story around a work of art. So
a question for Henry. We know that this Bonnard, the one on the right, as an example, was, featured in one of the final exhibitions of Bonnard in New York. We also know people like Rothko went with Milton Avery to see this exhibition, and Rothko very clearly said that he changed the way he looked at color after he saw Bonnard's depiction. If you take a big focus on one little portion of this Bonnard, it looks like a small Rothko. When are we going to start getting post-war contemporary buyers and even ultra contemporary buyers who are interested in artists who feature this kind of like Jonas Woods on that, to start looking back at history? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think Morgan's totally right in the sense that, the $4 million difference here between this and the others. I mean, how much of that is provenance? I mean, it's an amazing story to be able to connect this to Matisse and this kind of gifting between the two artists. And that's still something that artists do today. And that's often of respect and love and kind of comradeship. So, how much of provenance is that price difference is a really kind of interesting one. But I think Morgan's, absolutely correct. This is, this to me could be, Hilary Petchus. I'd much rather have the Bonnard. I'm a huge Bonnard fan, and I think Bonnard is a really wonderful artist. But, there are so many artists that are populating, the first lots at a Phillips evening sale right now who are quite clearly, I mean, I don't want to be too rude, but who are clearly ripping off this kind of work. And I think, Phillips in particular, I know Phillips as an auction house that sells, very young, very frothy, very hot material. And I think the New York sales are very interesting because they had a lot more depth than they do normally to London, which is, really heavily weighted towards, the latter end of the 20th century and the very, very new. So, I'm sure the auction houses are very busy trying to cross-fertilize and kind of cross-pollinate their collectors. And I think if you're, quite frankly, willing to lamb out $5 million on a bad Matthew Wong, then why not spend $5 million on a great Bonnard? And I think what the nature of the market right now, the prices that are being paid for artists whose CVs are so short and they are so young, all of this stuff now looks cheap. $1 million just doesn't go very far. It's kind of bananas. And so if you wanted to chase fashions right now and you want to chase the names that have currency right now, $1 million just kind of doesn't cut it. So, I think, people often talk about antiquities and how, they look inexpensive compared to contemporary. But I think now the way the ultra contemporary segment of the market is, things like Bonnard are starting to look cheap. So I think the auction houses will be very, very busy sort of positioning these things visually as kind of, in dialogue with the very young material.
When I first work with a client, and I know we all do this, I always ask, have you had an art historical audit of your collection? I mean, do you know who influenced your artist? Are you able to track it? Are they represented in your collection? I think they're great opportunities to make these links, from the ultra contemporary to the past and create a more solid collection overall.
Well, and I have just one quick point too that I think is interesting, because having been in the Impressionist and Modern department at Christie's and then having the post-war and contemporary department as two very separate things at a time. Post-war was always coming to our library to find books and comps and everything, and never would we go the other direction. And I think we're going to see a big change there. I think, granted, there weren't printed catalogs this time, but I mean, even with that, as you said, with that Bonnard, there was a lot of linkage to current contemporary artists. And I think we will see a lot more of that, of those comps looking forward instead of looking back.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Next department.
Yeah,
I agree totally. Sorry, I'm cutting over you, Anita, but yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, it's kind of fascinating that now that sort of upselling and using one to prop up the other, it's actually going to go back the other way. And I can picture the auction catalog now. This Bonnard looks like a Jonas Wood. You should buy it. You should buy it.
Totally.
Yeah, strange new world.
Yeah, it is a strange new world. Now, I don't want to spend loads on the Macklowe collection. Is there anything important that we need to understand about the Macklowe collection? We know it was highly guaranteed. We know it was very blue chip, and we know it's a divorce. Is there anything that is important for us to understand out of the Macklowe collection, either Morgan or Henry?
Well, I think the big talking point was the buyer of Linné, and that being Justin Sun, if my memory serves me correctly, who is a tech entrepreneur and involved in cryptocurrency in a big way, as far as I'm aware, as an investor, and has a fund and has all sorts of things. And the big, not concern, but the kind of industry chatter before the Macklowe and the Cox collection was all of this brand new minted billionaire money or millionaire money. Is that taste going to translate into older material? Is it just going to chase people? Is it going to chase NFTs? To what extent will millennial brand new fortunes go for older objects? And I think this was one of the big sort of really strong assertions that actually buyers will have much greater depth and art historical width than you might have kind of previously given them credit for. So for someone to kind of step into the market, relatively speaking, and for this to be a relatively early purchase, that's it's a really gutsy, punchy move, and a real kind of interesting kind of way to mark out your stall in terms of taste moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think
so. Oh, sorry.
No, go on, Morgan.
And also just to compare and contrast with Cox again, I mean, this is an institutional piece. I mean, this is such an important piece, much like the Caillebotte. But, you know, in the end, it was amazing. The Caillebotte did go to an institution, the Getty, which sadly is probably the only institution who could afford to buy either one of these. So, you know, I think it's just interesting when you look at it in that space. But I am glad he announced it. It's nice that we know where it went.
Yeah. Well, he's announcing more than just that, right?
I think that's a really big point that actually merits a little bit more unpacking, which is that, you know, when Meta Koven, you know, outed himself as the buyer of the Beeple, you know, there's a lot of economics, politics at play in terms of, you know, slamming this kind of money down on the table. And I think, you know, just shows that these big results, these big trophies, the role, you know, we were all quick to talk about the death of the trophy piece, you know, a few years ago, but I think now the world's moved on, and, you know, the trophy's kind of back as a status symbol. It's really kind of got a new currency in this very sort of fastly moving market.
Well, you know, it's a nonverbal way of communicating power. That's absolutely, you know, absolutely there. And we also, you know, I live in Silicon Valley myself, and we've always said, you know, when are the tech guys going to step up and become role models? You know, we've seen some of them, but in not that many in Silicon Valley. So we're always looking for, you know, those role models who they'll look to and say, oh, and a trophy piece says it, you know, better than anything. Or, you know, so let's talk quickly about a little of, you know, the impact of female artists. You know, when we've looked at this change in the market, we've seen unbelievable increase in value for artists like Joan Mitchell. But has that trickle down affected modern and impressionist focused on female artists as well? Are we still seeing that? Morgan?
I think so, because seeing from these results that I pulled out, I was happily surprised to see such great results for two of these women artists. I mean, Gabrielle Munter is fairly well known, but again was Kandinsky's partner, so was sort of always the you know, known as the other. Suzanne Valadon was Maurice Utrillo's mother. So I think it's really nice to see that collectors are not only revisiting post-war women artists, but are starting to look further back and sort of give these artists more recognition and get them higher on the totem pole.
I would say, you know, I think Gabrielle Munter has been undervalued for a long time, although very well known, undervalued. And she did the good, the bad, and the ugly too. Not every work of hers is great, but it's been an artist that I've been tracking for a long time. And I think there's a lot of potential upsell, you know, for an artist like Gabrielle Munter for sure. And then let's look at the Queen herself. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with the Kahlo market. And can you talk a little bit about the price achieved, you know, for her work in this case?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that was there, you know, there were sort of rumblings after the sale that there was a slight disappointment that it didn't, you know, break all of the records for her and Latin American artists, but for the fact that she was able to exceed her husband, I think was really the good main talking point after the fact. We all know that so much that her oeuvre is, so much of it is inaccessible because it's not allowed to leave Mexico, so there's not a whole lot of works available. So, you know, any good one that comes up is going to have a lot of attention, much like this one did.
Yeah, and let's, you know, I think it's sold on the guarantee, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And, you know, let's not be mistaken, you know, how many people really want, you know, Diego to be the third eye on a painting. It's just, it's not an easy painting, you know, of all of her oeuvre, but it does demonstrate the strength of her market, just as Georgia O'Keeffe's did as well. I'm going to move on because we have so much to talk about, and I don't want us to not have enough time. Okay, I thought this was absolutely fascinating, and I'm hoping that when we can look at these browns, we can talk a little bit about quality, but then price achieved, because they're not all the same quality, and it goes back to kind of the issue we saw with Loiseau and with Bonnard. So take us through these Cecily Browns, why they all kind of sold at the exact same price with different estimates. Why did they all sell for this price, and what does it tell us about her market? Henry or Morgan, either one.
So I mean, I found this fascinating that these are all within spitting distance of each other price wise. The Spree and Untitled, which are on the left, on each end, they carried estimates that made sense in relation to each other, and the prices therefore make sense in relation to each other. Ben Sinister came from a really low estimate to hit price parity, and I think what was really striking about Cecily Brown in these sales is that they don't come up that often, and so there was a huge, in Cecily Brown terms, a huge glut of material in the New York sales, and that obviously met a very, very healthy demand that's kind of always been there. And the one on the right, a colleague and I, Roxanne Cohen, who's unfortunately not on the call, but we were looking at these paintings beforehand, and I'm wondering where it was going to go. And I actually, to be totally frank and lay my cards on the table, I thought the 2007 piece was going to hit a new record of maybe 8 million, which was a little bit punchy retrospectively. But Spree on the left, I picked out early on as a pretty special example, partially because of the date, partially because it's got that red fleshiness that we, in that kind of figurative eroticism that we know Cecily Brown for, and I picked that out and circulated that amongst clients in the lead up to the auctions, and I think there was just strong works on offer, and I have to say, this consistency across her market, I was surprised considering how impossible it is to get a work on the primary market. So I have clients who desperately want primary market Cecily Brown now, and I keep going to her galleries, and the answer every time is go swing for it, and go swing for it for the next however many years. It's sort of impossible. And what's also kind of interesting about her market is that if you follow her on Instagram, you will see literally hundreds of works leaned up against the studio walls. And so I think what these results actually quietly speak to is the strength of control that her markets exercise, of her galleries exercise over her market, and the kind of strength of control that she exercises over her market. I have no idea what's gone on behind the scenes here, but this kind of price parity, it sort of has an echo in the control over her primary market. Morgan, I don't know if you have anything to kind of add to that, or whether you think that's a wild theory, but there seems to be a sort of a degree of control here in terms of what's happening. And these are all bang in line with her current, or I don't know which has the new record now. I think Spree is the new record, but these were all in line at the top of the range.
No, that is really interesting. I mean, just from a sort of layman's perspective too, just going and seeing these works in person and really getting, like, they felt very different. The scale was different. The Spree was a lot more graphic in person. You really don't get the sense of it in this image. So I was very surprised to see this consistent level throughout them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a discipline. There's a discipline in the market. So, that is a very important component. When we see artists, when oversupply enters the market to the point in which, the good, the bad, and the ugly is all entering, it can really have a devastating impact on value. So I think that's why there was such a surprise that there were so many pieces that were of quality coming to market. But I think you're right. I think it's a discipline that they have.
Well, I think it's also interesting to note, because I think these all three came from the same collection. Am I wrong there? I feel like there was.
I feel like Ben Sinister and Untitled.
Right.
The two on the left came from the same collection, and one was Phillips. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. And this brings us to the moral of the story. I think this graph says it all, but it very much reflects what we're seeing with the ultra contemporary market. And I think it's something we all have to grasp with. We've been trying for our clients to acquire a few works in primary, and they're absolutely impossible to acquire. There's almost nothing you can do in order to acquire them. So I want us to go through some of the issues around the ultra contemporary market. We can look at some examples and then take it from there. So let's start with good old Shara Hughes. God knows, talk about an oversupply in the market. So take us through, this particular artist market. And again, we can see walking right back to Bonnard, to Matisse, definitely to Matisse with her artworks. Tell us what's going on with this market. And if we did want to acquire one of her works from a primary source, would we be able to?
So just to define what ultra contemporary means is ultra contemporary is an artist born after 1975. And also, just to clarify, this is not a widely adopted term. ArtNet came up with this term about 6 months ago, and all of us in the trade have kind of cottoned onto it because all of these terms, contemporary, post-war, impressionist, modern, that we usually end up using the auction house terminology and the auction house's rough buckets for where stuff goes. So I think it is high time we had something that is different from contemporary, which now could be something from 1965 almost through to 2020. So it's a huge range. So that's what ultra contemporary means: artist born after 1975. I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here, and this is kind of my shtick for a lot of this ultra contemporary stuff, and say that what makes my mind boggle with some of the artists that we're going to look at and a bunch of the others is that a lot of this stuff just isn't good.
Right.
It's not good by an emerging contemporary artist standard. Sometimes on a really good day they can knock it out of the park, and I think these two, I picked these two for that reason, which is that I think of the two, the right hand one is quite clearly more sophisticated, but how much of this work, how much real depth is there to this work? That's the kind of question I keep coming back to time and time again. How much kind of intellectual depth, how much aesthetic depth, how much complexity is there? And is this just a pretty painting? Are a lot of these artists who are making these big money sums, are they just pretty? And I think, without wanting to be too black and white about it, I think the answer is yes. They are, they're uncomplex. And they're attractive. And I think a big part of what's going on now in terms of dynamics is that the auctions are all now interconnected. You can have an auction in London and bidders in West Coast, East Coast, Asia are all dialing in and all bidding simultaneously. And I think during the pandemic, a whole swathe of artists whose work reproduces well online, whose work reproduces well on Instagram, that essentially, the flattening effect that you get on the internet, their work is essentially kind of made for it because it's very graphic, it's very easy to sort of digest. And I think, this artist, the last time I saw this artist outside of an auction context was in a New York solo show in 2015, before I had any idea who she was. And I remember coming out of the show and just being like, wow, that was a bad, underwhelming show. So, I don't want to be too mean, but
it's too late.
How much? It's too late. But a lot of this stuff, I feel like it's just hitting some part of the zeitgeist, and it just runs. And trying to differentiate between why is one artist going for 3 million and another artist that's probably just as good in many terms, they're still selling at 30 grand. Why is that happening? And I think a lot of it is about the dynamics of consumption right now.
Yeah, I do. When we take a look at the Hong Kong sales coming up, I mean, there's so many of these artists represented again and again and again and again, because they know that it's going to churn a certain amount of money out of these artists. So let's take a look at some other examples. I know you've already made reference to Matthew Wong. God rest his soul. Can you tell us, what are your thoughts about Matthew Wong? And I'll go back. I mean, there must be only so much supply. He died, reasonably young. But it seems like every single piece he's ever created has come to auction for the obvious reasons, right?
Yes, and I think now there is no artist, God rest his soul, as you said. Now there is no artist to be loyal to. Everyone's just cashing in, and it is a gold rush. And I think Matthew Wong's market is one of the most surreal developments in the history of the art market. He had his auction debut in 2020, and his first year at auction sold $25 million worth of kit. That's insane, and hit an auction record. Went from zero to a record of 5 million in months. That speed of acceleration is mind-boggling and totally historic. And these two I thought were an interesting comparison, because the one on the left is just a bad painting. There is simply no other way we're allowed to make qualitative judgments because
Yes.
we're advisors. And this I don't without sort of assassinating it too much, it's just a really bad painting. It looks also unfinished. It looks clumsy. The one on the right is a good Howard Hodgkin, and it's very derivative. It's perfectly attractive, but just compared to what this object has price parity with the Bonnard. That's just I don't understand it, but I think Matthew Wong's caught that zeitgeist thing that Basquiat had, and I think not only did they both die young, but also if you look back, I'm just finished reading a great book by Anthony Hayden Guest called True Colors, which is about the art world in New York in the 80s. And everyone thought Basquiat was a total charlatan and that his work was simple and not going to go anywhere. And so I think people buy into that. They don't want to miss the boat again, and they love that sort of mythos around someone dying young, which is a bit macabre, but is just the nature of the beast.
Well, the question is, when we look back in 20 years, will we say that Matthew Wong changed the direction of art history? Was he part of an oeuvre of artists that changed the way we look at art? Well, certainly he may have had an impact, but will he have changed art history? Can't argue for that. Now I would like to we've kind of made our point in many respects. So I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna fly over this example. And I just want to have a brief moment looking at, where the NFT world fits into this larger ultra contemporary world. I imagine we would call these ultra contemporary artworks as well as being digital artworks, correct?
Yes. So there's a couple of important points to unpack about this, and I'll try and be quick and get through them. Number one is that this was guaranteed for $15 million and was also consigned directly to auction by the artist. What we're seeing more and more of now, alongside Damien Hirst's, infamous example with Sotheby's at the end of the noughties, is that artists like Abudir is another very good example. Artists are consigning directly to auction, and the auction houses are very happy to work with artists now. That is a big development.
It is.
What I also found really interesting about this piece is that it's an NFT and a physical component. And for what it's worth, I actually kind of like the physical component. I think it's quite cool as an object, and it would be amazing to live with. But the fact that it is an NFT and a physical component is people going to move off the computer screen into the physical realm. Mm-hmm. I think someone quite wise has told him that if he does, he stands to make a huge amount of money. So, that's kind of interesting. But also, the other interesting thing about this is that because this is essentially being consigned directly by the artist to sale, the auction lot text was basically like a sale contract. The buyer was signing up to a range of terms, and one of the most startling ones of these is that Beeple reserves the right in perpetuity to alter the contents of this artwork. So I'll just repeat that. You're buying something that the artist has an inalienable right to change forever in the future, which again is kind of fascinating and very, very interesting. And then just my final point on NFTs, which is that we've been debating them all a lot, and I think NFTs, to me, the way people are collecting them feels a lot like collecting stamps in terms of the criterias and the categories and the rareness and the lack of aesthetic content, lack of intellectual content. I think NFTs are just going to become their own separate world and their own category, and we'll get the odd one popping up in the big evening sales and so on. But I think they now have a life of their own as an auction category.
Well, sorry, Mouse, got to throw you a left-hand ball. So someone buys this NFT. What are the insurance concerns around buying a digital artwork, especially with a physical dimension to it?
Yeah, so if it's a digital artwork, it's generally covered under your collections policy, where it will have an access in it, but it's always, of course, good to check the exclusions. From the NFT perspective, we're still working on that, and we will get back to you soon. We're looking at how it's appraised, how it's valued, working with the appraisal organization to really establish what that would look like. So I can't help with that yet.
Well, I imagine the good news is you have a sale price at auction. Thank God. So at least there's a number that people everyone had the opportunity to bid on this, and someone actually paid this amount, and it was above the guarantee. So these are all positive things in establishing value. The question I always ask, is it only crypto people who are bidding on it? Henry, do you have any insight into that?
I'm afraid all I've got is anecdote and art market headlines like everyone else. I think my 10 cents on NFTs is that it kind of has to be individuals for whom the digital, whether by virtue of their generation and demographics or by virtue of how they've made their money or how they've run a business, the digital has to feel like the defining influence in their cultural landscape. And I think that's what has to unite anyone that's spending, $1 million plus on a JPEG or any other kind of, NFT, is that the digital universe has to be their defining, the world against which they measure everything else. Whereas, if you're into Impressionism or if you're, art historically minded, NFTs are this weird aberration that are very recent. It doesn't kind of come out of the main way you see the world. So I think that's for me what feels like connects all these NFT buyers.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I can just consider it another medium, digital.
Yeah.
See, simple Americans say things very simply. Okay, now Art Miami, it's right here. We're getting ready for it. We know that there are lots and lots of sales. Obviously, Art Basel is the most important, but then lots of other opportunities. Henry, you were so kind to kind of give us a few highlights let me just get there, of places that we should potentially think about if we're entering Art Basel. So with this map, are you suggesting that these are some of the galleries that you think will have kind of some of the best works to look at?
Yeah, this is a relatively unimaginative but very trusty route that sort of bisects the fair. And if you start at the bottom with Heli Narmad, they've got super whizzy blue chip, top tier, Picasso's, Miro's, the works, everything, sort of that you could want in terms of classic modern. And as you work your way up through all the way to the top to Victoria Miro, who's right at the top of this map, you have Flora Jukanovic, who is the latest auction sensation and about 26 years old or something like this. So if you walk this route, you're going to get a great kind of spectrum of art history. And this is, a lot of the heavyweights. White Cube, for some reason, are way out of shot on the other side of the fair. But this is a great mix of the blue chips.
Perfect. And I hope for those of you that are going, you have tickets and you can get in and, get ready for big crowds, because I think this is the biggest group of people we've seen come in for a very long time. Okay, so last thing that I think we really need to focus on, because all of us are going to be going to Art Basel. We've been to the auctions, we're buying. I've never seen so much buying ever. I mean, this is just outrageous how much people are acquiring, and it's not just artwork, it's everything. So obviously from an insurance perspective, when we're talking about insurance of your collections, it's not just art, right? It's everything, right? All of these different categories. But what I specifically want you to talk about, because I think it's very helpful to us, is looking at the different kinds of insurance, private collection versus homeowners, inland marine versus. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference and when we would want one kind versus another kind?
Yeah, I think most people, it's a common misconception that most people think that their art collections, either the collectible or the actual artworks of art, are covered by their homeowners insurance. And even though that's true to some extent, often there are lots of exclusions and it doesn't often provide sufficient coverage. So I think here you see a very generic, very high level kind of overview of some of the things that may or may not be included in one versus the other. I would always recommend to speak to your broker, ideally someone who has, specific expertise in the collection space, in particular if you start to accumulate significant wealth and significant value in your collection. What I found is that a lot of our collectors don't really know that a lot of objects that may be very for day-to-day use are actually part of their collections and could fall under their collections policy. I think a big difference is, for instance, a dedicated collections policy will have worldwide coverage. So if you're moving and you have multiple homes, that will be very, very helpful. Again, I would still recommend to let your broker know when you're moving art around so that they can make sure that the transport is organized accordingly. And, you can always contact us as well to ask for who might be the most appropriate person to help you with some of those things. I think what's also important to check is the limits. So for the homeowner policy, you often have categorization limits. Again, that might differ from each policy, but you don't want to end up with that you actually have more in that specific category than you thought, and then you're not insured to value. Partial losses are not always covered in terms of the diminution in value. It's also important to think through, like, market is changing so much. So regular appraisals from an independent appraisal organization are key. But having said that, like with a private collections policy, you will have some support there as well, because we will be looking at the date of loss, which will be the key date, and then there will be some market appreciation coverage there too. And usually private collection policies don't really have a deductible. So all of those things are super helpful, I think, and will make you whole. And that's really the purpose.
Now, Mouse, I hate to say this, but 99% of our clients, when we say, who's your broker, they say AIG. So can you please differentiate what a broker is from an insurer? I know that sounds ridiculous, but I am telling you, they have no idea what the difference is.
So we're a carrier, so we will write the policy, and the broker is actually the person who will not just look at your collection generally, but actually looks at your home and looks at your entire kind of portfolio, sometimes also your commercial holdings, and will be able to find you the best placement. And there are many very qualified brokers, in this field, and you can always contact us, and we're very happy to point you in the right direction to find a suitable broker as well.
Perfect. Now, just quickly, those that are at Art Basel, I imagine there are a gadillion shippers who are now getting ready to ship things absolutely everywhere. Some of the shippers are excellent and some of them are extremely scary, and some people are throwing them in the back of their cars. So tell me a little bit about claim scenarios specifically around transport.
Yeah, so basically accidental damage or breakage, both by frequency and by dollar amount, is our biggest categorization of claims, as you can see here. So we would really recommend to make sure that you work with good people who are transporting and handlers, etc. And if you need any help, of course, we're here to point you in the right direction. That's some of the extra services that we provide, and I'm sure the Fine Art Group has a Rolodex as well of people that we recommend that are the dedicated art handlers and can help with that. I think in general, planning for what may or may not happen, we help with that as well. So we do collection care assessments. So we will walk through your house and we will look at where the weak parts might be, and whether that's looking at how the water pipes run or where your painting or your artwork is positioned. And then of course there are these emergency situations, so we help with that as well in terms of pre-planning for that, and we have dedicated organizations who we partner with. So you never know what might happen. You don't want to be ending up in an emergency situation. It's not something you want to think about right now when you go on an art fair and you're enjoying yourself, but we're here to help you also when it doesn't go very well.
Exactly. It's not something you expect. So is there anything, last little tidbits you want to give us in terms of insurance for our clients to make sure they'll be made whole again in case of loss?
Yeah, I think so. The 5 key points or the 5 key takeaways that we can part with is know what you have. There are incredible collection management and inventory management systems out there, and again, we can point you in the right direction for that. Know what it's worth, so work with an independent appraiser organization and have regular appraisals done, or even desktop updates. That's better than nothing. Know where it's located. It's very often, particularly if things move around a lot, that people don't really know what was where. Keep it safe and secure, so make sure your collection is insured to the right number, and then that it is in the right climatological conditions, and that it's regularly inspected, because wear and tear on condition is often not covered through insurance. So you really want to make sure that you work with conservators to do that. And then don't ever hesitate to call in an expert. We're here, we do this for a living, and we love to help you.
Yeah, and what I would say is, in terms of that full-fledged collection management, one of the things the Fine Art Group does is that we kind of manage all aspects of our clients' collections. We have 3 full-time registrars, we have a full valuation team, we handle logistics, everything for our clients, and obviously work very closely with AIG. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. And I have to say, not bad. We made it at 12:03, which is exactly 1 hour, just the way I like it. But this will be recorded. So we're happy to send a recording to you. And thank you, Henry and Morgan and Mouse, for sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Anita,
very
for
much.
having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.